So this is part 2 to Notes 2.5. We started Notes 2.5 yesterday, and we actually did numbers 1 through 10 on the worksheet. And then I told you hold off on the last 4 questions because this is the second part that you need to be able to do those last 4 questions. And what we're learning today is how to write an absolute value equation given the solutions on a number line. So imagine this, like we already know if I gave you this absolute value equation, you know that you need to set up the positive situation exactly the way it is without the absolute values, and you're going to get an answer 3. And we already know that for the negative situation, same thing, you rewrite the whole thing, but you put a negative on the 5, and you get an answer -7. So that's what we did yesterday. Today, I want to be giving you 2 answers, x equals 3 and x equals 7, and I'm going to ask you to come up with the absolute value equation that gives you those 2 answers. Now you just saw me show you that one. This is it right here, x plus 2 equals 5 inside of the absolute value. But anyway, let's show you how to create an equation when they give you 2 answers. Okay, so let's all go to that little piece of paper that I handed out. Okay, and we're actually going to jot down our notes right here. We're going to write down our notes right on this piece of paper, and you're going to glue stick this piece of paper in your notebook. Okay, now it's really easy to come up with an absolute value equation when they give you 2 answers. So on this particular example right here, they give you 2 answers. The answer is -2 and the answer is 6. So imagine we need to find the equation that when you do set up the positive and the negative situation, it gives you a final answer of x equals -2 and of x equals 6. Don't write that down. Right now what I want you to do is write down the notes right here, and here are the notes. Check it out. Boom. Right here on this blank spot, please write down the word midpoint. It's a little bit of geometry for you. Midpoint. What do you guys think midpoint actually means? The point in the middle. That's right. Midpoint is the point in the middle. And over here, you're going to write a different number, and that number is going to simply be the distance from the point to the midpoint. Now, if you're thinking, which point? I don't know if I'm going to use the -2 or the +6. It doesn't matter because distance is always positive, right? So you could look at -2 and see how far is it to the midpoint, which happens to be 2, right? By the way, if you're wondering, how do you know that the midpoint is 2? Simply look at your points and then just 1 in, 3, boom. See how you get to the middle? You just start counting till you get perfectly in the middle between the 2 points. The midpoint is 2. And what's the distance from here to here? It's 4. And the distance over here? It's 4. So it doesn't matter if you use this point or this point, you got to count to the middle and it's going to be 4, right? Like from here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so how do we find the equation that gives us the answer -2 and also +6? This is the setup, guys. The setup is absolute value of x minus something equals something. That's exactly what you guys are writing down right here. And on this first something, what belongs in there? The midpoint, right? So the midpoint happens to be 2. So we're actually going to write down that midpoint of 2 right in there. And how about the distance from point to midpoint? The distance from here to here. We said it was 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to put that 4 right over here. And ladies and gentlemen, we're done. That is the equation that actually gives you the answers -2 and +6. Pretty cool, huh?
What if instead of like being on the 6, it would be like on the 5? It would be like a decimal?
It would be a decimal right between 2 values, right? So that's a good question. Like, let's say, what if instead of, let me do this. What if, let me cover this guy up. And let's say you had the point 6 and 7. Then what would the midpoint be? 6.5. It would be 6.5. So in here you would have x minus 6.5 equals, what would the distance from here to here be? 0.5. So this setup always works. This setup always works. But let's go back to the problem that we just did right here. Let me move this out of the way. Whoops. So we found the equation. Let me just prove to you that it really does give us the two answers, -2 and +6. Again, you would set up positive and negative situation. And the positive situation is exactly the same, but without the absolute value. Whoops. X minus 2 equals 4. And the negative situation is the same thing, x minus 2 equals -4. But you just put a negative on your right-hand side. Then you solve both. So you're going to go +2 here, +2 there. You're going to end up with x equaling 6. That is one answer. Now the other one, let's go with the +2 here, +2 there. X equals -2. As you could see, the equation that we just found, the absolute value of x minus 2 equals 4, that really does give us the answers 6 and -2. And those really are the answers that are up here, 6 and -2. So they're going to give us any two answers, and you're going to be able to use these notes to create the absolute value equation that gives you those two answers. Let's go to yesterday's worksheet. It was WS PM 2.5. And let's practice by doing those last 4 questions down here. And down here it says, write an equation. And we need to use the notes that you guys just copied down, the setup on how to write your absolute value equation. Let's look at number 11. So our answers are -1 and +1. So the setup is always the same. Absolute value of x minus blank spot equals blank spot. In the first blank spot, we need to find the midpoint. What would the midpoint be between these two? 0. So the midpoint is 0. Let me put it in blue so we could see it. That's the midpoint, 0. So I'm actually going to write the value of 0 right in there. Even though it's pointless, I'm just going to do it just so we could see how it always works. And over here on this side, we need the distance from the point to the midpoint. So from here to here, how many units? 1, right? Doesn't matter if you go from here to here or from here to here. It's still 1 unit only. So you put a 1 out there. And that's it. That's your equation. However, you could make it look a little bit nicer because we all know that x take away 0 is just x. So you could make this look nicer by rewriting it. Absolute value of x, you don't need the -0, equals 1. Let's try number 12. Number 12, what are our two answers here? Our two answers are -5 and -1. Now, you got to visually see where the middle's at. -3 is the middle, right? Right there. So -3 is the middle point. Let's set up our situation. The absolute value of x minus the midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So right here, we're going to put the midpoint, and we just said that the midpoint was -3. Now, you have to write -3. Don't think, oh, it already had a minus sign, I don't have to write it. No. You set it up this way, x minus. You always write x minus. And if the midpoint happens to be a negative, you better write negative once again.
Can you put parentheses?
You could put parentheses if you want, but either way, you know that the minus negative is going to eventually change to what? Plus positive, right? So you could do that right now. Now, how about the distance from the point to the midpoint?
1.
Is it really 1 unit or is it 2? Right? From here to here, 1, 2. Or from here over here, 1, 2. So that's 2 units, so we're going to put a 2 on the outside. And that's it. The only thing that we could do to make it look nicer is to just write one single plus. So absolute value of x plus 3 equals 2. That's the best answer right here. The best, not answer, the best absolute value equation that produces the answers of -5 and -1. Move on, number 13. What are the answers here? 3 and 5. Okay, thank you. 3 and 5. Okay, so what's the midpoint?
4.
4. Wait a minute. My notes got all ugly here. There we go. That's better. So the midpoint is 4 right here. And let's start writing our absolute value equation. Absolute value of x minus the midpoint equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. So the midpoint's what?
4.
And the distance is just 1. And that's it. We're done. I mean, there's nothing else to do. You can't make it look nicer besides making it all one color, I guess.
Remember you noticed since you guys have one
Yeah.
it says it's
Number 14, what's the midpoint on 14?
0.
That's right. And of course, the answers are right here and right here, so the midpoint is 0. X, wait, let me go black here. X minus the midpoint, which is 0, equals 4. 4 units from either this one or this one. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4 units, the distance from the point to the midpoint. And that's the answer. All you could do to make it look a little bit nicer is not write minus 0. You could just say absolute value of x equals 4. That's the best possible absolute value equation. That'll give you both answers, 4 and negative 4. Pretty easy, right? Now, we are going to practice with WSP. This was WSPM. We're going to have worksheet 2.5 WSP. I did notice some confusion yesterday, not on the solving where you do the positive situation and negative situation. I saw you guys did that pretty well. But I did see some confusion on the first 4 questions. Now, the first 4 questions, they say evaluate. And evaluate simply means plug it in and then do the math. These are not equations. See, number 5, it says solve. Right here it says solve. You're going to have to do the positive situation and the negative situation. Up here on 1 through 4, it says evaluate. And I hope we remember that evaluate means to plug it in. Plug what in? Plug in the answers that they give you. Not the answers, the values that they give you. So they tell you A is 2, B is negative 3, and C is negative 4. All you have to do is plug in the values that they give you. So for example, this negative 3, you're going to plug it in right there. And then you're just going to do the math. Absolute value of negative 3 plus 1, close the absolute value, plus 8. You just do the math. Now, absolute values, they kind of work like parentheses. You got to do what's inside of there first. What's negative 3 plus 1? So you have negative 2 on the inside of the absolute value plus 8. Now, what is the absolute value of negative 2? 2. And what is 2 plus 8? 10. So you're not solving anything. You're just plugging in and then doing some adding or subtracting and maybe one absolute value, right? So you're just doing some math. It's not till down here where you have to do the positive situation and the negative situation. Again, the positive situation, write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. The negative situation, same thing, but just change the right side value to a negative. And then you solve both and you get 2 answers. But up here, you're not doing that. Up here, you're simply plugging in the values that they give you. Let's do the hardest one, number 4. Could somebody just read me from the instructions what the value of A, B, and C are? A is what? 2. Okay, well, you know what? Just notice that I wrote everything. I wrote the absolute values. I wrote the plus. I wrote the minus. And now I'm going to plug in my A, B, and C into those blank spots. The A value you said was 2. The B is what? Negative 3. The C is what? Negative 4. So the minus changes the plus right here, but we still need to work on the inside of the absolute value first. What's 2 plus negative 3? 1. Close? Negative 1. So inside you have negative 1 and you still have the plus 4 on the outside. So it would be 5 because the absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1 and 1 plus 4 is 5. You know what? Number 3 was a good one because a lot of people make mistakes. I might as well do number 3 here. What's the value of C? So we're going to plug in a negative 4 right here. And on the inside of the absolute value, negative 4 plus 1 is what? So we have the absolute value of negative 3. And then on the outside, we have a 5 minus. Now, a lot of people see that minus negative, and they want to change it to a plus positive, kind of like if it were parentheses. But the thing is, you do that when you have parentheses because there's nothing else to do inside of the parentheses. But right here, you actually have an absolute value that you could actually do. What's the absolute value of negative 3? It's 3. So you really have 5 take away 3, which is 2. So the final answer is 2 on that one. Anyway, got a little carried away right here on this one. But yeah, yesterday you should be able to finish it. If you were confused now, you should not be confused anymore. Only the middle section is where you do the positive and the negative situation. And once again, the positive situation is just writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. And the negative situation is the same thing, but you put a negative on your right-hand side of the equation. And then you solve both and you get your two answers. Down here, you're writing equations, and in order to write the equation, you needed the notes from today. The absolute value of x minus the midpoint, closed absolute value, equals the distance from the point to the midpoint. I hope this clears it up, and you guys are going to be working on WSP 2.5. It's just more practice. These are easy. It's an easy section. It will be on the quiz Friday.